welcome back to our third episode of the Wealth Approach of our Legacy series. Today, we're going to talk about pre-family meetings. In our last episode, we talked about the importance of getting organized to get your affairs in order to be prepared for the pre-family meeting. So, Michael, let's start maybe in this episode to talk about why do families not communicate or think about these kinds of meetings?
Sure. There's a plethora of reasons why families don't want to talk about it, but we've really kind of narrowed it down to a few different buckets. The first is really, I think, the old adage that from parents' standpoint, they earned the money, their kids didn't, and it's really none of their business. At the end of the day, once the parents pass, that's when the kids will see, what's in place and what their inheritance looks like. But until then, sort of stay, hands off. But you also, on the other side, for families that have younger children, they don't want their kids to sort of have that fire taken out of the belly. If they see that there's a trust with their name on it coming, down the road, they start seeing different dollar amounts that, might in their mind say, oh, early retirement. Parents really don't want that. They want to make sure their kids are still successful, and they're still driven in their own personal lives. And with any type of family planning, sort of peeking behind the curtain, they want to avoid just saying, having their kids say, I feel like I can start, taking it easy now, when truth be told, that might not really be the case. And similarly, parents sometimes don't want to talk about it if their children aren't fiscally responsible. If they see a dollar, spend a dollar, well, they don't want to necessarily say, hey, here's what's coming to you, because they want that money to sort of last. They want to make sure their kids aren't trying to get an early inheritance, things like that. But other than that, we've got parents or grandparents that just really don't feel comfortable talking about money, or they just really don't know how to have this conversation. They know that they need to have it, if they're either getting older or they need a little bit more help, but it's not something that you talk about, at the Sunday night dinner table usually. So how to have this conversation with your kids and grandkids is very, very important. A lot of people just don't know what to say or what questions to ask or even how to approach it, sort of stuck at the beginning.
Well, that's where, to your point, Michael, the pre-family meeting is so important because you can never start too soon and it's never too late. And it's really a matter of assessing where your family is, whether your children are young like ours are, Michael, or in between, or your grandparents thinking about this. The pre-family meeting really helps you identify the concerns you might have alluded to and what you want to talk about, how to get organized. We talked about last time, making sure of where everything is, that you're financially okay and that you have your estate and documents in order. And then really kind of deep dive into what are your concerns. Do you not want to share values because your children are a little bit younger and you want to overcome some of that fire in the belly mentality, Michael, you talked about? Or your children a little bit older and they're settled in and you really want to share everything. We can help walk through in the pre-family meetings, important to identify which stage your family is in and how to prioritize and organize.
That's right. And I think a good way to look at the pre-family meeting is similar to the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. Similarly, staying kind of in from a parenting standpoint, but this is really more geared towards wealth management and estate planning and legacy planning. And when you're trying to figure out what you want to talk about, aside from the estate perspective and sort of the overall structure, a big component of these meetings is what are the core family values that you want to pass on to your kids and grandkids? What are the traditions that you have? Where do they come from? And if you and your spouse, have differing views, sort of why are they different? Where do they come from? And at the end of the day, if there are things that you want to pass on, or are there things that you don't want to pass on, having that open line of communication with the kids is going to be very, very important. And as we go through this pre-family meeting, we're also going to talk about how do you envision your kids and grandkids reacting to what we discussed in the family meeting, from the estate structure, from the family value structure. How do you think that they are going to handle this information? And as we discuss that, we can really learn and sort of figure out the best approach to how to communicate properly.
Yeah, well, let's talk about one of our favorite topics in pre-family meetings, Michael, and overall is fair versus equal. All
Right.
right,
So
it's a challenge. There's no right or wrong, but let's dive in maybe a couple scenarios here.
absolutely. So one scenario that we see is, if parents have a couple kids, and sometimes there's some cases where one of their children doesn't get married, doesn't have any kids, and the other child gets married and has a ton of kids. And as grandparents, sometimes they want to help out their kids if they need to pay for private school or this or that, or extra birthday presents. And over the years, the scales get a little off balance on sort of which child has gotten more money from the parents overall. So at the end of the day, should the child who doesn't have any children get the same amount, or at the end of the day, should the parents true it up where that child gets more, or again, does he get less because it's really about a generational type thing, and the parents want to help out the grandkids and they just see it differently.
Or another scenario we see commonly is the modern family, where one spouse might have three children and the other has two. And you've been married for a very long time. And then it comes down to, how do you split the pot? Do you give half to each side of the family? Or do you give each child a share? So in this scenario, does 60% go to one side of the family because there's three children, and 40% to the other? Or do you go half to this family and half to that family?
Right.
And you can see how these are challenging conversations, but there's no right or wrong. It's really the open communication that you can discuss pros and cons, truing up, as you said, Michael, with grandchildren or by family.
Mhm.
And these are some of the topics that you can kind of work through in a pre-family meeting before you lay it all on the table in front of your family at the family meeting.
Right. And I think it's also important to lay on the table, at least from the advisor perspective, from our perspective, is aside from the estate structure, but having all the values in place, whether or not you choose to share those with your kids and grandkids is entirely up to you. But for us to properly have the family meeting, it's important that we know sort of what values you're assigning to different assets. As an example, we have had one family meeting where the father thought that the family business was worth X. Turns out, during the family meeting, it was worth 2X, twice of what he thought it was. And that immediately changed the conversation because we were able to, help the kids, at that time say, all right, well, if that's the case, these are some of the steps you need to take. But if we didn't really discuss the values with the father beforehand, that might not have come up in the actual meeting. So as part of the pre-family meeting, it's really important that we do have that overall structure in place where we can talk about, the values before the family meeting.
And now as we turn, Michael, to the legacy, kind of maybe the fun part of the
Yeah.
emotional side of a lot of these. The legacy is so critical, but challenging. So let's walk
Right.
through some of the legacy conversations.
All right. The we've been doing these meetings for a few years now, and at every single one, somebody has cried, and they're tears of happiness. That for a lot of it, the legacy from the parents is really what's important. The money, the estate structure is nice, but at the end of the day, all the family, they've got themselves, and to go through the history of where the family was, to have those stories, to then get to what values are important, as we said, what are the core traditions they want to pass on, and what's important that to take from this conversation for their kids, and how they want their kids to sort of maybe integrate those values into their own lives. And having that conversation is one that isn't always easy, but to, in the pre-family meeting, help to define which key components we want to make sure are communicated. That's what really helps shape the conversation. And I also think that as we talk about this with the families, it's, again, what do the parents want or grandparents want to pass down? But also we like putting the kids or grandkids on the spot and say, hey, name 3 things, your parents or grandparents really instilled in you that you think are important to them. And to kind of see your kids or grandkids sort of bring back the things that are important to you, the values that you've passed on. I think that's a very proud moment for a lot of people to really witness. And as we talk about the legacy component, that's really why it does get so emotional, is that the family, you've been together for decades, and now you're really able to outside of the wealth side of things, but the closeness of a family bond is really a wonderful thing to see.
And when we encourage these so much, because the reality is too many times families find out what happens after you're no longer here. And to hear the stories, the why from you, your spouse in these meetings is invaluable. It's such a core memory for the whole family to know what's the why, the stories, the legacy, the bond that it creates over time. We just encourage more and more to do that. And the pre-family meeting is such a good way to get that process started, to find out where you are and get this open, intentional communication going.
That's right. So I think with that in mind, thank you for joining us for this pre-family meeting episode. Tune in for our next one where we talk about when we're actually in the family meeting, what we can expect, and just the different scenarios we see playing out.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.